The 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine has gotten everyone worried. What does the future hold? And could we be on the brink of another world war? The magnitude of such a thought is difficult for many to grasp. Never mind the hypothetical fallout that such a grand-scale disaster might have upon us all. This is Unveiled, and today we're answering the extraordinary question, what will happen after World War III? Do you need the big questions answered? Are you constantly curious? Then why not subscribe to Unveiled for more clips like this one, and ring the bell for more thought-provoking content. In order to consider a potential future, we must first learn from the past and see how the world changed after the two world wars that precede our hypothetical third. The aftermath of the First World War was immense, with long-standing empires falling, and with new border lines and land maps being drawn all across the globe. Over 20 million people died during World War I, while many more died as an indirect consequence of it. The severity of 1918's infamous flu pandemic was seemingly exacerbated, for example, by news outlets that sought to downplay the severity of the disease, perhaps due to the devastating toll that the war had already inflicted. The world was a deeply traumatized and depressed place at this time, although in all of the chaos, there were some more positive post-war outcomes, such as key steps toward universal suffrage for women in the United States, the UK, and others. But overall, there's no question, the so-called Great War was anything but. And sadly, the wheels were soon set in motion for World War II to begin just a generation later at the end of the 1930s. It's here, examining the aftermath of World War II, where the image of a post-World War III landscape really begins to take place. This is due primarily to the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki by the US in August of 1945, an event that would fundamentally change how wars were fought from that moment on. The military action in World War I, for better or worse, was a more personal one, aggression that required troops on the ground, in the sea, and flying through the air. Tactical planning and visceral hand-to-hand combat meant that troops were often forced to stare their enemy in the eye prior to making the decision to take a life. But that changed in World War II, and especially in 1945. The development of the nuclear weapons used on Hiroshima and Nagasaki directly led to an arms race between nations like the United States and the former Soviet Union. This then created the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, the idea being that a large enough nuclear stockpile should deter the future use of those weapons, since doing so would result in total destruction for both parties. But in the meantime, our species had perhaps never been more vulnerable to total destruction and collapse. So in order to imagine World War III, we have to picture a scenario where that doctrine is ignored. A scenario where we now live, at least partially, in a world devastated by nuclear fallout. This situation is unlike anything that came before, thanks largely to the incredibly accelerated level of technology there would have been at hand to inflict it. It would see the results of a whole new theater of war, and of when the ultimate distance is placed between the aggressors in that theater. Cities flattened and hundreds of thousands of lives lost due to buttons pushed thousands of miles away from a target. But World War III won't only have been fought with more manpower, air power, and hugely enhanced firepower. We're also talking drone, computer, and disinformation power as well. The world that's left behind after all of that would likely be ravaged by massive numbers of casualties, innumerable numbers of injured, long-lasting food and energy shortages, and roving blackouts. Specifically, there'd likely be no aspect of our world untouched by the devastating effects of radiation. This goes beyond the obvious, too, such as the deaths, burns, and radiation sickness that would affect the immediate victims of a nuclear attack, and into the world of agriculture and infrastructure. Over time, radiation could break down the very elements in our most critical materials, like the metals of our cities, and it can easily and systematically destroy organic produce, killing crops and livestock, as well as poisoning vital water supplies. Understandably, the immediate area of and around a nuclear strike is the hardest hit, but the spread is a whole other problem. Radiation zones are famously difficult to contain, with the exclusion zone around Chernobyl perhaps being the most famous example of all. So there's really no telling how all-encompassing the problems from nuclear weapons could be. In a situation where multiple bombs have been quickly dropped across all corners of the map, as is possible or even likely during World War III, the task of containing it becomes even more inconceivable. And then comes the even broader and even more species-threatening prospect of a nuclear winter setting in. Here, the entire Earth's system becomes so clouded and choked by fallout that drastic global cooling takes place, resulting in massive temperature shifts and overwhelming famine. And the time scale for such an event to pass is long. Years, decades, perhaps even centuries. There might be some truth to those more Hollywood-style post-apocalyptic scenarios where the few survivors that are left post-World War III carve out a barbaric and lawless landscape into the future. The physicist Albert Einstein is famously attributed with a quote that equates the aftermath of a Third World War to our being blasted back to the Stone Age. Although it is unclear whether or not Einstein ever actually said it, the sentiment behind World War IV being quote-unquote fought with sticks and stones feels valid, for there would certainly be no winners, only losers in this scenario. The global connection we now take for granted with the internet, as just one example, could crumble. On the one hand, we'll have seen mass cyber espionage and denial of service attacks as part of the war, and those would cripple communication links. While on the other, in a world that's reeling from the losses of the conflict, even the simple maintenance of such links could fade away. It could then be one contributor to that lawlessness that the movies so often like to zoom in on. But that said, there are some theories that the riots and lootings and killings and pack survival tactics actually might not take hold. A post-World War III Earth would already be a difficult enough place to survive in, so there are some who believe that the remaining humans might be able to work together effectively, rather than adopting an every person for themselves mentality. What do you think would happen? How do you imagine the survivors from our species reacting to the death and destruction they'll have just recently seen, and the incredible danger that they'd be living with day to day? Of course, whatever the response, economies and trade as we know them today would be extremely difficult to maintain. We need only look at the COVID-19 pandemic to see how disastrous a global shutdown could be on that front. But what if there's precious little left to trade at all? With whole cities and industries, whole workforces, plus crops, materials, technologies, food, water, and general livelihoods potentially destroyed the world over, would there be much of a social structure even left to cling to? One often suggested outcome is that those that do remain would promptly leave Earth and escape out into space somewhere. But how realistic is that really? Not very, considering that so far, only 12 of our kind have ever even made it to the surface of the moon. And that was 50 years ago, back on the war-ravaged ground. And with that mutually assured destructive genie out of the bottle forevermore, it's clear that our collective mental state would suffer. A sort of race to the apocalyptic end times might well be at hand, with doomsday cults emerging and gaining followers. Or else, the effort to rebuild what we once had would be unprecedented in human history, and hopefully, to remake it without all of the flaws that brought about this post-apocalyptic world in the first place. But of course, the best course of action would be to simply never let it happen to begin with. Ultimately, the choice is ours, whether or not to give in to this pessimistic vision of the future, or to do our best to ensure that it never becomes a reality for us, our children, or for any generations to come. Because that's what would happen after World War III. What do you think? Is there anything we missed? Let us know in the comments. Check out these other clips from Unveiled, and make sure you subscribe and ring the bell for our latest content.